With JD Edwards, you can use EDI for the following modules: sales order, procurement, inventory, accounts payable, and accounts receivable, as well as demand scheduling execution. All of these have standard functionality built into the software, and the use is actually quite easy. JD Edwards supports a number of transactions inherently. They support, as I mentioned before, everything from sales to purchasing to accounts receivable, inventory. And here's a listing of some of those transactions. And these, like I said, are all have functionality built into the JD Edwards 47 system. When using EDI with JD Edwards, here are a few things to note. Anything that regards JD Edwards that is brought up in this presentation can be found in the following document: JD Edwards Enterprise 1 Applications, Data Interface for Electronic Data Interchange Implementation Guide, Release 9.1. There are also documents that go back for 9.0, 8.12, and all subsequent releases. When using EDI with JD Edwards, flat files are the preferred method of moving data in between JD Edwards and the EDI translator. And with all EDI, there is some customization that is required. Not that it's a great deal, but there is some. When using EDI with JD Edwards, here are a few things to note. Anything that regards JD Edwards that is brought up in this presentation can be found in the following document: JD Edwards Enterprise 1 Applications, Data Interface for Electronic Data Interchange Implementation Guide, Release 9.1. There are also documents that go back for 9.0, 8.12, and all subsequent releases. When using EDI with JD Edwards, flat files are the preferred method of moving data in between JD Edwards and the EDI translator. And with all EDI, there is some customization that is required. Not that it's a great deal, but there is some. So with that, following my overview, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Denchey, who is the Manager of Channel Partnerships for EXTOL International. Mark?
Good afternoon, everyone, and it might be morning for some. My name is Mark Denchey. I'm the Manager of Channel Partnerships for EXTOL International. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about the EXTOL Business Integrator and how we work with JD Edwards in an EDI capacity. In typical integration, as companies have grown and evolved over time, their integration needs grew proportionally with them, sometimes disproportionately. Sometimes integration became much more important and grew rapidly. And these silos of information, little programs developed to access data, to connect systems together, connect pieces of systems together. And after a while, you started having these silos, and they became very, very unmanageable. The approach that EXTOL takes is to actually solve this by creating a middleware platform called the EXTOL Business Integrator, and sitting that between your external-facing partners, your customers, vendors, even third-party cloud and SaaS applications and services, and connecting that to your internal systems, which could be JD Edwards, could be other enterprise applications, could be homegrown applications as well. So that's the approach that we take, and what I'd like to do is actually switch over now and just show you a few things in the EXTOL Business Integrator on how we actually do EDI integration. And I'm showing the EXTOL Business Integrator on my screen here. Okay. And what we're seeing is the navigation area of the EXTOL Business Integrator. We can create projects. We can open existing projects. We have a reference area, easy to get to our support information, support videos, online systems like our customer zone. But what we want to do is actually build an EDI integration, and we have specialized tools to make this easy for you. We're going to switch over for the moment to our workbench. And in our workbench, we have several different objects that we can work with. This is actually quite large. I have several areas collapsed. But what I'm interested in is our EDI Inbound Wizard application. And as Jeff mentioned with his EDI transactions that he listed, one of the transactions was an 850. And that's a typical purchase order. And I'm going to use a purchase order as an example because it's a document that everyone understands. So it won't make the example complicated. what I'm going to do is build an integration framework around integrating an EDI 850 document. So we're going to call this, let's see, we're just going to call this ACG 850 for the Andrews Consulting Group. We'll call this an inbound 850 purchase order. We support X12 and EDIFACT, all of the standards that are available. I'm going to take X12 because it's most common in the US here. My next option is to set up a partner endpoint. Now, typically in EDI, we think of trading partners. But from an enterprise integration standpoint, we also think of endpoints, meaning applications, could be Salesforce, things like that. In this example, we're talking about two endpoints. We're talking about our trading partner and our J.D. Edwards backend system. So I'm just going to call this the ACG 850 partner endpoint for now, and this might be, we'll just do that. For EDI, we have several ways of onboarding EDI partners. This way, built in the wizard is one of our original ways. And what this form does, it gives us some little hints about where to look for this data. Now, since then, we've changed things. I'm going to just put in my standard EDI qualifiers to say that I can use anything in this field. And typically, we use phone numbers. I'm going to use my test and production indicator. I could also use our partner onboarding tool that will take sample data and apply a template to it, extract this information, and automatically build an endpoint hierarchy for me. It's very cool, very rapid tool to build integration partners. I'm going to pick my group code, which in this example is a PO. I'm going to just pick a controlling agency, version 10 release, and I'm going to create a document schema now from the EDI standards. We're just going to call this the ACG base 850 source schema. The EXTOL Business Integrator allows you to install, you can install as many standards as you want or as few as you want. We give you that option. I only have one installed on the system right now, my 4010 standard. So I can scroll down and pick which document I would like. I'd like my 850. So up to this point, we've defined the partner configuration. We've defined our EDI document. And now we're going to configure how did we receive the EDI document. And for this example, we're going to use FTP. We have many ways we can do this. You could receive an EDI document over web services even. It could be XML coming over web services. Your EDI document could be coming over web services, sorry. It could be off the local file system, monitored. It could be from FTP. It could be from our communications partner, Premier, over their Spazio product as well. And I'm given the option to create a new FTP adapter or select an existing adapter. This is one of the strengths of the Business Integrator. Every object is reusable. I'm going to select an existing adapter because I already have my adapter built that goes out to the EXTOL van. So I'm going to just reuse that adapter as it is. I'm going to write this data to a database. We're going to go to the F47 tables in this example. And I'm going to select an existing schema. I've already built some integrations going to the F47 tables, so I'd like to reuse that. And I'm going to use my JDE inbound sales order annotated schema. And I'm going to reuse an existing adapter. I have an insert adapter available that I use with my databases. Everything we do via databases is over JDBC. So the SQL standard actions apply, insert, delete, update, and select. I'm also going to create a business process script. All of this has to run and has to happen and execute in a coordinated way. I want to transform data inside my business process because we want to convert from EDI into our F47 tables. And I also want to create a rule set, build a map for this. So the system is going through and it's going to create some new objects, but it's also going to reuse some existing objects for us, which promotes predictability. These objects have been tested. It's going to save me some time, makes it even faster to build my integrations. So I'm going to click Finish. This should take a few seconds. It's generating the source schema from the standards. That includes all the allowed values, constraints, everything like that. And we've completed. Now we haven't seen anything change on the screen. It must have gone somewhere. In our organizer, we have a folder called ACG 850. Our organizer lets you build projects, and you can make them hierarchical, just as I've done here with some inbound documents for Volvo. This is completely freeform. It's up to you how you want to build this. Objects and folders can be moved around, so you can change your mind. You're not locked in to a certain course or path once you begin. If I double-click on that, I see I have my ACG 850 folder. There's a bunch of objects in here. I could see my portal adapter, my FTP adapter is here. My business process script is here, which we're going to look at. My collaborations and my partner endpoints, which we'll talk about at the end. My source schema, which I misspelled, little lowercase b there. My Jde Edwards schema, which we're going to look at. And also my map. And you say, well, how did it build a map? It really didn't. It stubbed things out for us just to get us moving here. But let's start with the flow of data, since it's an inbound purchase order. The data coming in is typically our EDI schema. And as we can see, this, if you're familiar with EDI, this looks very normal to you. BEG segments. We see some fields in bold, some fields that are not bolded. The bolded are required fields. But what if contract type code is required? Our partner is going to send that. And they want us to check to make sure that we've included that. We can come over to our constraints and just click on it and say required. And now when we look at it, it's bold. So it's very easy. You can adjust. We could look at the PER segment and say, well, we never need that. Based on our partner agreement, period amount, we don't use that as well. You have all the flexibility you want to make changes to this. You could add fields to it if you really wanted to. You'd be violating the standard, but you have that option. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over a little bit, and I'm going to check one thing. I'm going to come back to my Jde Edwards piece as well. It's my Jde Edwards database, and if you notice, it's hierarchical. It's showing tables and records, and these fields should all look familiar to our Jde Edwards folks. But I'm doing this for a very specific reason. Bear with me a moment as I just play around these two windows. If you look at these windows, they look the same. In the Business Integrator, whether you're working with EDI, a database, it could be XML, flat files, delimited, non-delimited, multi-format, single format, or spreadsheets, we normalize the view of the data. You only have to get comfortable with looking at it one way. You don't have to learn 5 different representations of the data. That's very powerful. So we have our data formats, our source and our target. Now let's talk about actually building our map. Jde Edwards maps are actually somewhat complicated. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm actually using the cooking show metaphor, so I hope you forgive me. And I started doing a map, started doing a couple things, but let's look at this as a whole. This is our rule area. These are our source schemas and our target schema. And if I double-click, this looks very familiar to what you've seen. If I look at my tables, this is my Jde Edwards F47 table, so it's very straightforward. I set up what's called a composite transformation rule. This is like a holder that you can conditionalize, you can create if blocks around, or you could group like rules together in it. It's very convenient for organization. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start, and I'm going to actually map that when I get a BEG segment, I want to automatically create a record in the F4711 table. So when a BEG segment exists, create this record. You could read that rule. You don't have a line going between here because we might end up mapping 200 fields by the time we get done. The Business Integrator is taking a different approach where our maps are readable, which means you can print them out and they're self-documenting. It's very valuable. I'm going to set up some mappings from what we call local variables, because some of the date fields in the Jde Edwards tables also need to be mapped. And what I did here was I moved some dates. I moved the BEG05 date into a value, and then I did some date conversions on it to give me a couple different formats of that date. And I'm going to move those fields now into some database fields in the table. So my first field that I'd like to move to is the SYTRDJ field, the order transaction field. And I'm going to move my formatted date, which we created right here, and I'm going to move that to that field. And you can see very simply we're moving it. I actually want it inside of the BEG loop, so I just moved it like I did there. Now, we have a couple other fields. We need to map user reserve date and date updated as well with the same value. We can do that. We have an option. We could have 3 different rules, but the business integrator is very flexible. So I can actually find that field. I can do something very cool. I can take this and just bring it down here. It's automatically going to add that in. And I have one other field I'd like to find, the date updated field, and I'm going to drop that in there as well. And now when I click off of it, we're moving that value into 3 fields directly. Really nice, very, very quick and convenient. I also have to update the time of day, and I have a timestamp actually created for that already, so we can move that in. Now, we've created some dates, we've mapped a couple fields in, but there's a lot more going on here that needs to happen. Well, we'd like to help you with that. We understand from our mapping that we created that we've tied the BEG segment together to our record. I can actually right-click on this and say Smart Map the structure. And what it's going to do, there's many things that are happening at this time. You're going to see quite a few things on the screen here, and I'm going to walk you through them. We have some fields like the beginning, the transaction set purpose code, and the order type code. They went to the same field. There's a little X on them saying where the Smart Mapper is saying, I'm just not sure about these. It doesn't make sense to me. And it gets corrected, it's not. The BEG03 is mapping out to the SYVR01, where it belongs. But how did it do that? How did that happen? What our smart mapping technology does, it does several things. We can look at structures of data and find relationships between them and make suggestions. It does this very intelligently. We can also look at how you've done things in the past and draw statistical inferences that, 87% of the time you map this field to this field. It's probably a good guess. We can also reference our cloud, the integration pattern repository that we have available, to see, basically it's like crowdsourcing best practices, to see, well, how have other people typically done this? So we have many ways of doing this. It's very powerful and it's a big time saver. I'm going to turn off these 3 fields here. But you notice we also have some interesting things going on, like we're moving zeros into this value. The system's making all these suggestions. It's looked at how we've done things in the past. In mapping into the F47 tables, there's a lot of constants that get mapped through there, and we need to know about those. So if I click on OK, it's just dropped in all of these rules, which is pretty cool. We have some rules, though, that where we're moving a numeric, a value, into a field. But if you notice, we have like move with normalize. I think that's all we have there. We have different actions. We have different ways that we can do mapping. Mapping is not just point A to point B. It could be point A using a certain function or an EXTOL action, a certain methodology. So the system will look at, this is how you've done it in the past. It's not going to create what we call a generic move, just slam the field from source to target. It's going to say, well, I've done this, and I typically trimmed padding left. It'll do that for you. It'll see how you've done things in the past. What I'm also going to do here is I'm going to actually do a couple other little mappings real quick. I want to map the REF segment and show you how easy this actually is to do. I'm going to create another composite rule. And this is interesting how this gets handled. And in that composite, I'm going to say use my REF as a source. And it's saying for each REF, because it knows that by the cardinality, it needs that. And I'm going to highlight the REF02 field. This is the field I'm after. And this interesting little pop-up shows up. Up here, I was able to smart map structures. Down here, it will look at the field that I'm on, and it'll say, you know, based on everything I know, this is where you typically like to put this. And we like to put that in the SYURRF field. So I'm just going to click on that. And just that quickly, that piece is mapped in. So now let's go down to the detail section. It's a little more involved here. And I'm going to create a composite. And we're going to go down to the PO1 segment group. If I would type PO1 and not PO exclamation. And we're going to create a segment for that. So for each PO1, we have our composite. And what we're going to do is we need a variable called line integer. And we want to move a 0 to that. So we're going to create a new rule. And we want to move, and all we're going to do is move a 0 to the line number. Nice and easy. And now we're going to go into our segment. We want to zero out our line counter before we start processing. Pretty straightforward. And we're going to take our PO1 data and actually map that to my F47012 record. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. So for each PO1 now, we're going to create a new record. Actually, I did that incorrectly. I should have mapped PO baseline data, so I can just drop that in and correct that. And now it's saying when a PO1 baseline data record exists, create a new record over here. So very simply, we're going to do some mapping, but we're going to do something pretty interesting, pretty different. All the way up in Area 1, which is a totally separate piece of the document. Typically, when you're in the details for EDI, you're working down in Area 2. We're going to take our BEG 03 all the way up at the top, and we're going to put that in the SZBR01 field. So we're working, in a sense, almost out of context, where we have data that we've dealt with up in a header section. Now we're down in the detail of building our output document. Yeah, we can just as easily reference that very simply. And we can do the same thing we did with our dates up here, where we can actually map those in. And we're going to go to, let's see here, going to go to our SCTRDG field. And I'm just going to map one for the sake of argument. We're just going to map, date requested. We'll just move the value into that. And what we can also do now is we can do a smart map structure again for everything inside of these segments. Now, for folks that are familiar with EDI, you have the notion of ID qualifiers. And it's a paired field where you have an ID and an ID qualifier. The qualifier might say AB, and then the ID would give you a code. The system found that we have many of these, and we probably had a map in the past where we built out 10 or 15 of these based on a very complex document. I'm just going to turn those off. I'm also going to look, and where I'm looking at the unit basis price code, didn't really have any suggestions for us, so we'll turn those off as well. In looking at these fields, I could override this. Maybe, even though it probably is wrong in the Jde Edwards world, I could say and send the data to SZUPRC, so I can override that. And again, more constants came in because we've done this in the past. And just that quickly, I mapped in these fields as well. I could conditionalize this and say I only want to do the BEG03 if, let's see here, purchase order type code contains AB, something to that effect, and I can get a badge on that. So the mapping tool itself is tremendously powerful, tremendously capable. So that's how we build our maps in our tool. So what we've done at this point is we've looked at we have our source and our target data, we built our map, but we need to see how this all works. And that's in our business process. And from the business process side, this process looks very simple, but I'm doing this for a very specific reason. Let's ignore this little guy, the set collaboration parameter. That's a housekeeping function that we include. We come in, and when the process is fired off, and this could be fired off by a script that made the FTP calls to the van, pulled the data in, and then handed the data to us, which is what's happening here. It could have been an activity like a web service provider that received a connection. Could have been pushed to us over AS2. Many different ways this could happen. Well, we start off with a script. We come in, we execute our transformation, and then we execute our adapter to write our data out to the system, which would be our 47 tables. Now, the green arrow here is showing the flow. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn the blue arrows on. This shows the flow of data. Our data is coming in on our input. It's going to our source of our target, of our transformation, out our target, which is our database format, and to our database adapter, which understands how to read that and put it into the system. If anything goes wrong, it's going to come down and it's going to hit what we call our fail pin on the script, and it's going to mark the script as failed. And I'll show you that in the logging in a moment. But what if I want to do something more interesting with this? What if I don't want to just fail the script? Maybe I want to do something as simple as send an email. Let's say Jeff is building this integration, and if the transformation fails or the database insert fails, he wants to send an email. Pretty straightforward. It's not a typical email, but I'm going to cheat for time. But one thing that we can also do is we can also attach our data coming in, can also be attached to the email. So very easily, we can customize these scripts. Our business processes can call other business processes. They can launch activity. Just like our transformation rules, our maps, you can also execute activity. It's perfectly valid to run an OS command, execute a Java API, or execute a web service consumer in flight in a map. And you can have as many of those as you want. That's fine. But let's think now, we have this process, and we built this, and we really like it, but we want to use this for any EDI 850s that come in. We have one hindrance. We're locked into this map. That's not a good thing. But what if we had a way that we could deal with that? Let's set up that the transformation now does not know what map to run. And for the script, let's add what's called a collaboration parameter. We'll call it map to use. And we're going to pick what type of object it is. And let's say it's a rule set. So now when this script fires off, it's passed in some data, some control information, and it's also passed a design time EBI object. It's pretty crazy. So let's look at how that's used. Let's close our script. And remember when we went through the EDI wizard and we put in the information about from the ISA segment about how it identifies a document. That's called a partner endpoint. And you can see this data here. Partner endpoints belong to an endpoint group, which ultimately belongs to a collaboration profile. And this collaboration profile is what links the endpoints to the script to run that we were just in. But what's really cool about this is now we have this parameter we just created in the script called map to use, and I'm going to go in and set a value, and I'm going to pick my 850 JDE rule set. What's happening now is anytime this process runs, we receive EDI data, the system analyzes it, it notices that it is 850 data, it matches up to one or more endpoints because you can carbon copy and you can do parallel processing, perfectly legal. It finds the profiles that those endpoints belong to, and then it connects those profiles with the scripts and passes the data through. So it's very powerful and very reusable. From the acknowledgement side, collaborations are where the acknowledgements are controlled. For EDI, we control acknowledgements all the way down to the element level. So we can decide what runs, what doesn't run, what really is an error, what isn't an error, especially if you have a partner that they do something non-standard it violates it, but you know they're going to do it for the rest of time, and you don't care, so you can turn off the validation for that one little piece if you want to. So that's how we build our integrations. It's a very quick, very short tour. The other thing I'd like to show you is, well, how do we track all of this as it's going on? We have a process auditor that we have available in the system. And if you notice, when we were running the script, and if it failed, it would go to the red pin on the exit. That's what happened. I was doing some work with some data, kind of made some mistakes, so we generate some errors. And we can see here it was creating the log of connection, executed the syntax analyzer, and in the router it had a problem. It couldn't work. Things that we can do, depending on the actual types of errors and where things had actually failed, we could come in and we could see, well, what did the source data actually look like? And this was actually a database out. Was this inbound? This was inbound EDI. It failed in the aggregation of the data, so it doesn't look like normal EDI. We could see all kinds of different system values. And if we come over here and look at a successful one that passed, we can see our outbound data that we were working on. And here's our actual EDI that we received in. And for a target, we were writing flat files, in this case, out. So the system is very powerful. You can monitor session status, system values, file system monitors. We also have a web-based dashboard to monitor your system, monitor your trading partner volumes, transactions by trading partner, things like that. So we offer quite a bit as far as the management piece goes as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude my demonstration, and I'm going to turn the screen back to Bill.
Thank you, Mark and Jeff. Okay, well, we do have a few questions that have already come in. Our first question looks like this one is actually for Mark. Mark, can EXTOL integrate with any versions of JD Edwards, both World and Enterprise One?
Well, the fact that we can create and read, I'm going to say yes implicitly, and the reason why I'm saying that is because we can integrate with any databases via JDBC, and we can integrate with any flat file formats, whether they're single format, multi-format, delimited or non-delimited. I would say yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Our next question for JD Edwards EDI. What kind of customizations may be required? I think that's for you, Jeff.
Most of the customizations are going to revolve around data. Customers will need to be tuned, maybe items, specifically just setup information that will need to be done for the JD Edwards standard process to run.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And another question for you, Jeff. Though flat files are the preferred method of information transfer, are there other ways to exchange information, i.e. direct file reads and writes?
Absolutely. As Mark showed in his demonstration, you can connect directly to the database via the EDI translator, and direct reads and writes are possible.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, our next question, can EBI only transform EDI data? Mark, I think that's for you.
No, absolutely not. We can do EDI, whether it's EXTOL artifact, XML, flat files, databases, or spreadsheets natively in both the old Office 2003 XLS format and the Office XML format.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Another question for you, Mark. After creating my first map, how difficult is it to bring on new trading partners?
Actually, this is pretty cool. It's one feature that I didn't have time to show, but in talking about the collaborations and the endpoints, if the partner is using, if the process is the same, you just create a map for the partner's data, create the endpoints, and you can hook it into the same process, passing the map as a parameter. So it's very easy. That's one of our strengths is rapid onboarding of partners.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, our next question. Will the tool work with JD Edwards World A92 and Japanese double byte character set?
It'll definitely work with, I'll answer the Japanese character set first. Everything under the covers for us with it being Java is Unicode, so we handle double byte character support natively. That's not a problem at all. We have several customers doing that. And Regarding the J.D. Edwards, unless Jeff sees a reason why it would not, I do not anticipate it would have problems. We have customers on many different versions of JDE.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Mark, another question for you. What version of EXTOL were you demonstrating?
I was demonstrating the latest EBI 2.6 that was released probably, I'm going to say 6 to 8 months ago.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Actually, Mark, got 7 questions for you coming up here. What does your tool do when we need custom F47 tables and a lot of customization?
What we actually do, one thing I did not show is how we actually retrieve the schema for the F47 table. Because we use JDBC, we actually discover the data and the tables. It's not like we send you a locked-in F47 schema. You can point at the tables, drag them into the hierarchy you want them, like order header, order detail, things like that. And then we go and actually pull down all the metadata about the tables. So that's nothing to worry about at all.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Another question here. Does your tool validate F47 data as it is written to the F47 tables?
We don't do any specific validation because we're more of a data transformation tool. We'll validate from an EDI standpoint because we have the standards available to us. But, and Jeff, please feel free to jump in here. Any validation would be from the 47 tables back into J.D. Edwards. That you would validate, I think, after you get the data into the 47 tables.
That's correct, Mark.
Okay.
Okay, our next question. Do you have support for custom JavaScript PHP functions? And then add-on question to that, external library support.
Yeah, actually we do. Because you can execute activity in our system from the business processes and from the maps, we can run operating system level commands depending on the OS that you're on. We can call Java APIs. We can actually call C APIs as well. And we can also execute web service consumers. So in the examples of JavaScript, PHP, you could certainly do that through the run OS command very easily. We've actually had people that have called Visual Basic programs from inside of maps, which is kind of pretty crazy, and pass partial pieces of data into it. So yes, there's 3 different ways you can execute activity.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Can you elaborate as to how JDE does the verification? We currently take our EDI to work tables and run SQL scripts to validate before loading the data to the actual JDE 47 tables.
Well, what you could do with our tool, again, we don't do your typical, what would be standard JDE validation. We leave that actually to the ERPs. It's the cleanest way to do it. But if you wanted to do validation, what you can do, since in our maps you can conditionally do conditional processing, you have the idea of, I showed you a map where we went from source to target, from EDI to J.D. Edwards. We have many customers that have what's called a targetless map. Let's say the EDI data comes in, and you want to do some custom application level validation on the data. You can do conditional processing to check for values, do lookups in code tables, SQL lookups, things like that, right in flight in the map, and if everything's good, you can pass that along to a process that would write it into the tables. So that's very customizable, and many, many customers do that. In fact, you typically do that on Outbound when you're extracting data.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Does your tool update the F47 files for outbound transactions after a successful transmission so it is not sent out again?
Yes, there's actually a way in our mapping tool that if you're working on, these are typically outbound transactions going from the database maybe out to EDI. What you can actually, you have several ways you can do this. You can map it, you can set update flags while the data is being mapped out to an interface file. So you can say the data was exported or moved out. But then you have to look at from the communication side, how do you handle that? You have data going out, it could be going out FTP, it could be going out AS2. You would have to run a separate transaction to do that, but it would be a very lightweight transaction that would just jump back in and update it, and we handle the correlation all the way back through the communications chain if it's our products. So there's several ways you can do it, but yes, you can definitely do that. With hundreds of customers, probably every one of our customers does that.
Okay, Mark. Next question, is there an EXTOL knowledge base online, and how extensive is it?
Yeah, what we do is our customer support system has. Oh, I know a few years ago we passed the 100,000 ticket point in our years with our customer base, and the knowledge base is derived from that. The knowledge base probably has several thousand entries in it that I could think of at this point, and that's inside our EXTOL customer zone that our registered customers can just access along with technical documentation.
Okay. Well, that appears to be the end of our questions. Thanks again for attending today's webcast, and have a great day.